It wasn't just a revolution, it was a bloodbath. France didn't rise up overnight. It exploded. Streets turned into war zones, mobs dragged enemies from their homes, and the royal court collapsed in real time. Families vanished, heads rolled, and the most civilized nation in Europe descended into pure chaos. But here's the real twist. This wasn't just about bread or taxes. This was about power, fear, and the terrifying truth that when ordinary people are pushed too far, history doesn't whisper, it screams. The broken system. By the late 1700s, France looked powerful on the surface, but inside it was rotting. Out of 26 million people, 21 million were peasants, barely surviving on scraps of bread while the rich lived in glittering mansions. The poor paid crushing taxes. The nobles and clergy, they paid nothing. Even worse, half of France's money was being drained just to pay debts, thanks to wars like the American Revolution, where France bankrolled freedom abroad while starving its own people. At the top sat 400,000 nobles and church elites, owning a fifth of the land, trading stocks, and enjoying privileges the common people could only dream of. And when King Louis XVI tried to fix the system with tax reforms, the Estates General made sure nothing changed, because the nobles and clergy could outvote the majority every time. Everyone knew the game was rigged. The system wasn't just unfair, it was explosive. The first sparks. On June 20th, 1789, frustration finally boiled over. The Third Estate, the 98% of France who had no real voice, arrived at Versailles only to find the doors to their meeting hall locked. Officials claimed it was for cleaning, but everyone knew the truth. They were being shut out. Refusing to be silenced, they stormed into a nearby indoor tennis court and swore an oath never to disband until they gave France a new constitution. That moment, the tennis court oath marked the true beginning of the revolution. But inside Versailles, the royals carried on as if nothing had changed. Queen Marie Antoinette lived in a world of silk gowns, gambling tables, and luxury feasts, while peasants starved just beyond the palace gates. Louis XVI ignored reformists like Lafayette and Mirabeau, too busy hunting and feasting to notice his country crumbling beneath him. Meanwhile, rumors spread like wildfire. Pamphlets whispered of royal plots to dissolve the National Assembly and crush the people by force. In the streets of Paris, anger turned into action. The spark had been lit, and the fire was spreading. Bastille and blood. By the summer of 1789, France was ready to explode. Bread prices soared so high that families spent half their wages just to eat, and mobs flooded the streets of Paris looking for answers. And weapons. Whispers spread that the king's troops were marching toward the city. Fear turned into rage. On July 14th, the crowd seized thousands of muskets and cannons, but still lacked the one thing they needed most: gunpowder. The solution was a looming medieval fortress, the Bastille. To the people, it wasn't just a prison. It was the symbol of tyranny. The gates were shut, soldiers hurled stones from the towers, and tension snapped. Cannon fire and musket shots rang out. Chaos swallowed the crowd. When the fortress finally fell, the governor was dragged out, and the mob didn't stop at victory. They took his head. Moments later, severed heads on pikes paraded through Paris. When King Louis XVI heard the news, he asked, "Is this a revolt?" The chilling reply came, "No, sire, this is a revolution." The people snap. The fall of the Bastille didn't calm France. It unchained it. Across the countryside, peasants rose up in fury, burning noble estates, looting grain stores, and hunting on lands once forbidden to them. Rumors of counter-revolution spread like wildfire, stoked by radical newspapers. One voice was louder than them all, Jean-Paul Marat, whose paper demanded purges and blood. His words fed paranoia, birthing the Great Fear, a wave of panic that turned villages into battlegrounds. And then came the women, starving, furious, and desperate for bread. Thousands armed themselves with knives, pitchforks, and muskets. They marched on Versailles, dragging cannons through the mud. Their target wasn't just bread, it was the Queen. Marie Antoinette, already despised as Madame Deficit, was accused of mocking the people while feasting in luxury. In the dead of night, the mob stormed the palace. Guards were slaughtered. The Queen barely escaped her chambers, fleeing barefoot through hidden passages as the mob hacked at her empty bed. By morning, the royal family had no choice. Surrounded and humiliated, they were marched back to Paris. Once rulers in their palace, they were now prisoners of the people. The royals' fall dragged back to Paris. The king and queen weren't rulers anymore. They were hostages. To the crowds, Louis XVI looked looked less like a monarch and more like a prisoner wearing a crown. Still, the monarchy limped on, a shadow of its former power. But behind the palace walls, the royal family plotted. In June 1791, Louis and Marie Antoinette disguised themselves in plain clothes and slipped out of Paris under cover of night. Their goal? To reach Austria, where the Queen's brother would raise an army to crush the revolution. But fate wasn't on their side. At a small village inn, locals grew suspicious of the well-dressed strangers. Their cover was blown, and soon the royal family was dragged back in disgrace. Crowds jeered as they re-entered Paris. One sign nailed to a wall warned, "Anyone who cheers the king will be flogged." The failed escape destroyed what little trust remained. Moderates who once hoped to save the monarchy were swept aside. In their place rose new leaders, fiery, ruthless, and uncompromising. Robespierre, Danton, and Marat were ready to turn France upside down. The revolution had new masters, and the king's days were numbered. Revolution turns cannibal. The king's betrayal didn't just humiliate France, it lit a fuse. By 1792, France declared war on Austria and Prussia, but instead of glory, disaster followed. Armies crumbled, whispers spread that the royals were conspiring with the enemy, and fury boiled over in the streets. On August 10th, 20,000 Parisians stormed the Tuileries Palace. The king's guards, Swiss soldiers, opened fire, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. When the smoke cleared, over 600 Swiss lay butchered. Cooks, servants, even children were cut down. The palace was looted, drenched in blood, and the monarchy shattered. And then came something darker, the September massacres. Terrified that prisoners would rise up and join invading armies, mobs stormed the jails. What followed was slaughter. Over 1,200 people were hacked to death. Men, women, children, even the sick and insane. Heads were stuck on pikes and paraded through the streets. The revolution, once a cry for liberty, had become a frenzy of blood. By autumn, the monarchy was gone. France declared itself a republic. But freedom didn't feel like peace. Instead, the revolution had started devouring itself. Terror rules. The monarchy was finished, but France wasn't free. It was furious. In January 1793, King Louis XVI was led to the guillotine. As the blade fell, the crowd erupted. Vive la République! Some even dipped handkerchiefs in his blood as souvenirs. The revolution had crossed a line. There was no turning back. But executing the king didn't calm the chaos. It unleashed it. Foreign powers declared war. Enemies were everywhere, and paranoia ruled Paris. The solution, according to Robespierre and his Jacobins, was terror. The guillotine became the ultimate weapon, swift, public, and terrifying. At first, it claimed nobles and priests, but soon anyone could be next. A careless word, a rumor, even serving sour wine could mark you as a traitor. Men, women, the elderly, even children were dragged to the scaffold. Entire towns faced mass executions. Joseph Fouché once replaced the blade with cannon fire, blasting hundreds to pieces in a single afternoon. To the radicals, it was justice. To everyone else, it was horror. From 16,000 to 40,000 people died during the Reign of Terror, and most weren't nobles at all. They were ordinary peasants, the very people the revolution had promised to save. The revolution eats itself. By 1794, even revolutionaries had had enough. The guillotine had become a daily spectacle. Fear hung in every alley, and whispers grew that Robespierre had gone too far. He outlawed dissent, shut down churches, and demanded more purges. When he delivered a speech hinting at new traitors, but refused to name them, even his allies realized they could be next. On July 27th, the tide turned. Robespierre was shouted down in the National Convention, arrested, and dragged from power. That night, he tried to rally support, but no army came. When soldiers stormed his hiding place, he was shot in the jaw, his face shattered and bleeding. The next day, he was hauled to the guillotine. As the blade dropped, his scream was cut short. The terror had devoured its own leader. But peace never truly followed. The White Terror swept France, targeting Jacobins who once ruled through fear. By 1795, the poor were still starving, and the revolution's promises felt empty. Then, from the chaos, a new figure rose. A young general named Napoleon Bonaparte crushed a royalist uprising with ruthless efficiency. Within a few years, he seized power and crowned himself emperor. The revolution that began with cries of liberty ended with an empire born from blood. Conclusion: the French Revolution promised liberty, equality, and brotherhood, but what it delivered was blood, fear, and betrayal. The monarchy fell, but so did thousands of ordinary people who had once shouted for change. The guillotine silenced not just kings and queens, but peasants, priests, and even the very revolutionaries who sparked the fire. And in the end, after a decade of chaos, famine, and terror, what replaced it all? Not freedom, but an empire under Napoleon. The faces at the top had changed, but for the poor, little else had. So what was it all for? Was it justice, or just another cycle of power devouring itself? One thing is certain. When people are pushed to the breaking point, history doesn't just repeat, it bleeds. If you thought the French Revolution was shocking, just wait. History has even darker twists. Thanks for watching, and if you want more untold stories of power, betrayal, and chaos, make sure to hit like, tap, subscribe, and ring that bell so you never miss the next episode. Which part of this story stunned you the most? The fall of the Bastille, the Women's March, or the Reign of Terror itself? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'll be reading them, and stay tuned, because in our next deep dive, we'll uncover another moment where history repeated itself in the most unexpected way.